Hey everybody, and thank you for joining me in another video. Hope y'all are doing well. So in this episode, what we're going to be focusing on is setting up the update camera function, just like we discussed in the previous video, where we're basically going to be making a structure file that will house like simple camera settings that we're going to have as our default, and then also be able to switch between with like our camera style aims, camera style far, camera style close, some other stuff, and go over how things transition when we click, our aim button and some other stuff. So let's go ahead and get into that. So as you can see, what we're in is the input action graph from our previous episode. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to close out of that to go back to the event graph, and what we're going to do is we are going to make an event tick, because what we're going to do is when we create our function, we're going to connect it to our event begin play and our event tick, so that way when we begin play, we start off with the default styling of our camera, and then as we click the aim button, like on and off, stuff like that, the event tick will then take over to transition our camera like back into aiming, go to far, stuff like that, right? So let's go ahead and get into it. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is open up your content drawer, and within your content drawer, what we're going to do is I'm going to click Control-Shift-N to create a new folder. And what we're going to do is I'm going to call it data, because this is where I'm going to be housing like all of our enumeration files, our structure files, and curve floats, and some other stuff that we'll be making throughout the series to house in here, just like how we do in the game animation sample project, or at least how I did in that series, stuff like that. So let's go ahead and go into the data folder, and we're going to right click into here, and we are going to then look for blueprint and then structure, and we're going to rename it to, well, if the autosave didn't do that, we're going to call it s_simple camera params, just like that. And then we're going to open that up, and we're going to make some values in there that will be tied to our camera boom and our actual camera, right? So we're going to go ahead and let's make 5 variables that will be housed in here. So typically with structure files, what you're going to want to do is you want to basically tie in values that are relevant to whatever you're trying to work with, right? Where maybe when you're trying to make like a data table or something like that, or maybe you're not even making a data table, maybe you want to like make a file so that way, say if you're making guns or weapons throughout your game, right, that you have maybe a variable that's called like gun name, so that we can call it shotgun, rifle, sniper, whatever, right? And then its value here would be a name, or then it's just like current ammo, and you would have that as an integer, and then like max ammo, and you would have that as an integer, right? So the structure file is something that you would put together when you're trying to house data that are tied to some sort of relevant, component, actor, or thing that you're tampering with, right? So like in this case, we're trying to tamper with camera settings. So that's why we're making a structure file, because we don't want to sit there and make like a ton of variables just to then house under the camera category. We're just wanting to make a structure file to then call in to our function that will be basically all of our camera variables anyway that we'll be adjusting. So let's go ahead and change out these names, right? So the first one is going to be spring arm length, just like that. And then the next one that we're going to do is called a socket offset. And we're going to go through all of these in a minute once I change all the names. So then the third one is going to be translation lag speed, just like that. And then the next one is going to be field of view, so FOV. And then our last one is going to be the transition speed. So what we're going to change first is we're going to change the first one to a float, Then we're going to change the second variable to a vector. And then the rest of them are going to be floats. And I'm going to show you where we get these, right? So right now, these don't do anything and they're not going to relate to anything. But what we're trying to do is create like pseudo variables within this file to use when we do actually update the actual thing that we're trying to update, right? So for example, let's look at the spring arm length, right? So if we go back into the third person character template and we go into our viewport, when we look at our camera boom, because that's where the spring arm length is gotten from, right? Because this right here, this red line is your spring arm. So that's what that is doing. As you can see, even when we hover over it, it's our spring arm component. So what we're trying to look for with the arm length is we're looking for this right here where you see target arm length. So if we were to modify this to, let's say, like a value of 300, you can see how the camera shoots closer to it. So even if we do 200, camera's even closer to it. If we do 500, camera's super far away from it. But let's go ahead and set it back to 400 as our default. That's what they had it as. So this is one of the things that we're trying to modify within our simple camera param when we call this into our blueprint character. So let's go over to our default values because we're going to be making these changes here. So for the target arm length that we're trying to change or we want to modify, we want to set it as a default value of 300 because when we actually make our different camera styles, this is going to be the first one that we start off with. So then the next one, right, we have the socket offset. So the socket offset is basically where the camera boom kind of places, you know, the camera out here, right, behind the character. So if we actually turn to face where the camera is, when we look at the socket offset, which is right here, and this is why we made it a vector, because as you can see, it's a vector value. Say we wanted to move it on the z-axis, so say we wanted to move it 30 up, right? So positive 30. You can see that the camera boom then shifts the camera's end up by 30 units. So now we're looking a little bit above the character, or maybe say we go minus 30 units, we go below the 0, we go further down. So we're looking, at a lower point of our character. So we want to modify this. However, in the simple camera params, we want to just leave it as the default. We want to start it off as all zeros, right? So then the next thing would be the translation lag speed. And what the translation lag speed is doing is basically how it shifts back and forth, or how, when we actually do like the movement. So when it, translates, because translate is another form of location under your transform, basically. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to translate where the camera is at, right? So, if we want the camera to move this way, right? So, right here under the lag, where we have the lag speed right here, as you can see, if the camera lag is true, controls how quickly the camera reaches the target position. Low values are slower, high values are faster, while 0 is instant, no lag. But what we're trying to do is make up with this lag by moving the camera, like translate it forward, at a certain speed. And that's why we also have the transition speed, because we're trying to simulate this. But what we're trying to do is actually like place our camera at like certain points, right? I believe, I'm trying to remember where the actual thing is at, but pretty much with the camera boom, it'll be like your lag, but not in the lag that you think. So with translation lag speed, we're trying to translate between two different positions, like, either quickly or slowly or whatever. So if we aim, we want to translate in pretty quickly. When we're not aiming, we want to zoom back out, stuff like that. So for our translation lag speed, what we're going to set for that is 10. There's not really a specific reason to why we gave it, I gave it 10, besides the fact that I'm just kind of copying the game animation sample project, because I think that their lag speed for when we aim, not aim, or, when we unstrafe, that our camera then moves quick enough. It doesn't like fade back out or move slowly out. It goes at like a decent pace. So like it said, like the higher the number, the faster it is, but 10's like pretty good, right? So then we also want to adjust our FOV, our field of view, and then that will be done on the camera, where as you can see right here, our field of view for our camera settings, it's at 90. Well, on here, we want to also keep that as 90 as well. And then our transition speed, that's not really anywhere in there. This is just basically going to be our interp speed that we're going to be setting in our update camera function. So when we interpolate between two different points, this will be the interp speed of how it fluidly goes back and forth when we actually do, the translation or the translation lag speed. So for here, we're going to put it at 5 because that's what the game animation sample project has it as. So once you have all of those default values set in here, what we're going to do is I'm going to hit Control Shift Save just to save everything, and then I'm going to close out of this tab. So now let's go ahead and hop back into our character blueprint, and we're going to go into the event graph. And what we're going to do is we are going to create a function called, where is it? Here we go. Function called, if it will actually do it, called update. I can update camera just like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it under the category called camera just to kind of have it separate, or where I want it to be. And what I'm also going to do before we go in any further is our camera category right here underneath our variables. I'm going to change this to components because technically our can't follow camera and our camera boom, even though yes they are camera stuff, they're technically components of our third person character blueprint, because we're going to actually make variables, at least 4 of them, that will actually be our camera settings. So you can call this like components or camera components, but then our next section that we're going to be building is camera settings. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to first give this an input, right? So we're going to click on our camera and we're going to give it a Boolean value called interpolate. Because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be calling this at a certain point within our update camera function that will go between this and turn off or turn on our interpolate depending on, our button presses, where if we wanting to aim, wanting to strafe, or do certain things, that the interpolate will then kick in and actually move our camera, accordingly to what we're trying to do or whatever input action that we're trying to do or undertake, right? So we're going to have that set just like that for the moment, but it's not going to do anything until we actually program that functionality in. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create 3 variables. So I'm going to click the plus and I'm going to call this first one cam style underscore far. And with our camera style underscore far, I'm going to click into here and I'm going to then look for our structure file that we are going to be referencing. So as you can see right here, when I type in simple, that we get our simple camera params. So I'm going to create my variable and reference the simple camera params so that way we can use its built-in settings, right? So if I hit compile and save, you can see that when we do that, the default value for the camera style far comes in with the settings that we have set in that file. So as we went over earlier, we made a spring arm length of 300, and then we have like a socket offset of just zeros all the way around because we're trying to make some default settings, from our camera boom and follow camera. Then you can see that it has our lag speed of 10, our field of view of 90, and our transition speed of 5. So what we're now going to do is we're going to duplicate this a few times, or a couple times, and we're going to call this next one close, because we want a camera style to be at a certain placement from far away depending on an action, and close depending on a certain action. And then the last one we're going to have as aim, because when we're aiming we want a different, value type, right? So what we're going to do before we get started is let's adjust our camera styles to have different values. So with our far, let's go ahead and click on our far, and we're going to keep the spring arm length at 300, but then we're going to change the socket offset Z value to 20 because we want it to be offset by 20 when we're looking from far away. So then the next thing that we want to change is the translation lag speed. We want to put that to 6. Then the next thing that we want is the transition speed, which we're going to set to 2. So there you go. So that's our values that we want to place for the far. And there's not really a specific rhyme or reason why we do that. My rhyme and reason to it is just because I like how the Game Animation Sample Project has their camera style settings. So I'm just copying their camera style settings. So now we're going to look at our close, and our close is going to be the one that has, you know, all of our default values, except there's going to, or not all of the default values, like this will be the same, this will be the same, this will be the same. But our socket offset for what we have for close is 45 on the Y, and then a 20 on the Z. So when we're close, we want it to be offset in these positions. Then with the spring arm length, we want it to be closer to the character. So we're going to set it to 225. So that's the settings we want for close. So I'm going to compile and save that. And then for our aim, what we want for there is even closer settings. So we want the spring arm length to be 200 because we want it to be even closer when we're aiming. And then we want it to be just a little bit higher on the Y, or I mean a little bit to the side on the Y, and I believe a little bit higher. Yeah, we want to be a little bit higher on the Z. But then with our close, or with our aim style, what we want is we want our translation lag speed to be set at 15, and then our field of view at 80, and then we're going to keep the transition speed at 5. So we're going to go ahead and compile and save that. And now we're going to work on the next step, which is actually getting, you know, the values that we want set up, right? So go ahead and I want you to control get all of these different aim styles, and we're going to move them around because there's going to be certain things that we want to select when we have certain input actions, you know, selected. So the first one, we're going to set it up just like this, where we have our close and our aim and then our far over here. Because now what we're going to do is we're going to look for a select node just like this, and then you're going to copy and paste that up here, and we're going to open up our input variables, and we're going to grab our wants to aim and put it here, and then we're going to grab our wants to strafe and put it here. So when we click our aim button, because we're trying to signify that we want to aim, then we're gonna want, when that's true, we want to have the aim camera style to use when we're aiming. However, if that's false, then we just want to have our close camera style, which is gonna be our default camera style. So then what we're gonna do off of that is if we are strafing, or oops, didn't mean to do that. If we want to strafe, then we're gonna want our values off of here, because if we're aiming or starting off, you know, strafing, we want to have a closer camera style set up. But then if we're not strafing and we're not aiming at all, or, you know, whatever, then the last resort is having a far camera style, which what's going to happen when we eventually play is that this is pretty much going to be similar to our default third person character template, while this is going to be pretty much our right off the start for our new template, or our gasp style template, and then this is what's going to happen when we aim. So off of that, what we're going to do is we're going to break this down, because what we want to do now is translate, or not, I guess we're going to want to modify all these values depending on our camera style. So let's go ahead and move this back. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make another not a function, and we're going to make another variable, and we're going to call it, come on, camera distance multiplier. just like that. And this one we are going to make a float. So the reason why we're doing this, and what we're going to do is we're going to compile and save and make it a 1. But the reason why we're doing it is because we're going to have this 1, because what we're going to do is change these as we activate these different inputs to go between positive and negative values, right? So that way when we try to interpolate stuff, that we go, towards where our camera wants to be positioned, and then back out, when we want to reposition to other camera styles. So what we're going to do is let's do a make s simple camera params and look for that, because what we're going to do is this stuff is what's going to make our new updated parameters that will then pass through into a variable that will then update our camera settings when we drag them out later. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag out the camera distance multiplier right here, and I'm going to set it there. And what we're going to do is we're going to look for a multiply node, and we're going to copy and paste that here. Let me move that over. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look for some select float nodes, and I'm going to place them down here, because this is where we'll be doing our interpolating or going back and forth between our different camera params depending on our input actions. So if you're kind of confused, because like I said, I am going to be going pretty quick through these things, but if you're confused on what's actually going on, I do highly recommend checking out my game animation from scratch, where we do go over this a bit more slowly and more descriptive explanations on what this does. But like, just for real quick purposes, all this is doing is this is where we go back and forth basically between default parameters and whatever parameters we choose depending on our input actions. And so the reason we have the multiplier is to also go back and forth between positive and negative numbers as we interpolate from one camera point to another camera point. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag the spring arm length into here, the socket offset into here, and then our translation lag speed we're going to drag down into the select float, and then the transition speed we're going to drag down into the A of this float. So then what we're going to do is with our distance, we're going to plug that into here. We're also going to plug it into here. And then we're going to then connect the spring arm length output into the spring arm length here. And then the socket offset into here. And then our translation lag speed into here. And then our transition speed into here. And then what we're going to do is drag our field of view straight across, just like that. So let me go ahead and shift these around just so it looks tidier a little bit, so that way you kind of see better of what's going on. And then we're going to change our select float values down here to -1. And then we're going to then right click out of here and do a get interpolate. And you'll see right here as we type it in that it does pop up. So this interpolate we're grabbing from this interpolate right here that we had set up earlier. So as we, do our actions and stuff like that, the interpolate will then activate here based off of event tick and then choose between A's and B, for when we have to go back and forth between the different camera settings. So we're going to plug that up into the pick A Boolean slots just like so. And then essentially we are done setting that part up. So like I said, I know it's a bit confusing, but just the brief explanation of what this is actually doing is we're just going back and forth between whatever camera style we have here to the new camera style that we want to set depending on our actions. And the interpolate allows us to go from camera style point A to camera style point B back to C, A, whatever, and it goes between those values nicely. So then what we're going to do now is we're going to then create off of here a promote to local variable, and we're going to call it target camera params, because whatever we make into here is the target parameter of whatever camera style we are trying to choose to be set into here, but we're not calling it anywhere else. So we're just going to make it a local variable to switch in between here within our event tick updates. So with that, we can then move on to the next part where we then modify the different settings on the camera boom and the follow camera. So I'm going to drag out the target camera params, and we're going to then split the output pin, because now we're going to be doing different interpolate to functions where we go to different the different camera styles that we choose here. So what we're going to do real quick is I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it 3 more times, just because there's going to be 4 settings that we adjust. We're going to be adjusting the spring arm length, the socket offset, the lag speed, and then the field, I believe it's the field of view. Yeah, field of view. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag off the follow camera here, and off of the follow camera, we're going to look for the field of view, and we're going to do the set field of view underneath camera settings. So basically, if we look at the follow camera, we're essentially trying to get this, which is what this is. So I'm going to set it there just like so. And we're going to connect the field of view into the target camera param set node, just like that. And now we're going to grab an f-interp2 node. So as right here, as you can see, interpolation f-interp2. So right here, tries to reach target based on distance from current position, giving a nice smooth feeling when tracking a position. So this is what I was talking about, where basically the interpolates, you know, when we go from camera style to camera style, this will try to smoothen that interpolation or that, you know, camera placements like rather nicely, so there's no jitteriness, quickness, sickness, whatever, you know. So what we're gonna do also as well is we need to copy this and do it 2 more times. And the reason it's not 3 more times is because the last one that we're going to set is going to be a v-interp2 for vector interp2, because this, or the last one we're going to be setting is the socket offset, which is our vector. So let's go ahead and go back to the first one with our field of view. And for this one, what we're going to do is, so we want whatever our camera style is set to here, this will be our target stuff, right? So since we're trying to target the field of view specifically, we're going to plug the target camera param field of view that we want when we switch camera styles into our target. And then we're going to grab the transition speed and plug it into our interp speed. So now, as you can see, our interpolation speed, if the time is given 0, then jump to the target, which means it's just going to instantly go to our target. So that's why we're setting up our transition speed, because we want to smoothly interpolate to our target camera param. Then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a get world delta seconds, because we want to get the delta time every second. So that way we can plug that into our interpolate too. So that way it knows like, hey, like during these seconds or whatever, switch the field of view to here. You know, when we do our, when we're trying to reach one of the target styles. So then what we're going to do is from our return value, we're going to plug it into our field of view, because our target camera param, we want to now set that parameter here in the actual thing. But then what we're going to do is we're going to drag the output to the f-interp. So whatever we are currently at we're going to want to shift to that target depending on what input we place. So if we're trying to do aiming, it's going to go there. If we're not aiming, it's going to go to the close one. If we're not strafing, we're going to do the far one. If we're strafing, we're going to do the close one, you know. So the current is whatever we're setting the style to, and then the new style that we're trying to set it to will then be set into here. So that way it constantly loops when we do the different input actions. So now that we got that, let me go ahead and bring that down and then bring this over, just because I want that nice hourglass shape. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one, where I'm going to copy the get world delta seconds and I'm going to put it 3 more times because we are going to need that in the rest of them. But now for the next one that we are going to be doing is the target arm length here. So our spring arm length. So similar to the field of view, here instead we're going to grab the camera boom because that's where the target arm length is, and we're going to grab and look for arm length. Oop. And as you can see, we're going to grab the variable camera target arm length. So again, similar to our field of view, we're trying to obtain this target. So we're going to set that into the f_interp_to. And then our delta seconds, we're going to put into the delta time. And then our transition speed to how we transition to that new target arm length, we're going to put into our interp speed. And then whatever our target that we're trying to reach, we're going to set that target here into the set target arm length. And then our output will then be our current. So again, it's another one of those cycles where, you know, as we shift between the different camera styles, that our current is the new camera style, and then the camera style that we want to target will then set it into there and do that loop. So let's go ahead and move that up. So I'm actually going to move that closer. Now that we got that set, move that up. Having a nice little hourglass shape, fix that up. So there we go. So now we're going to do the same thing to this one, except this one's going to be a different one. Off of this one, we are going to be going for our lag speed. So we're going to need to grab our camera boom because that's where our lag speed is. And off of that, we're going to do set camera lag speed, just like that. So once again, this time we are focusing on the lag speed that we want to target. And then our delta time will go into, or delta seconds will go into our delta time. And then the speed at which we transition to that new target, we're going to now set. So again, whatever our target parameter that we're trying to obtain, we're going to then set into the lag, and then whatever we have set, we're going to get and retrieve as our current. So again, we loop once again, depending on what camera style we're trying to target or and obtain. So let's go ahead and move that over, move that up, and then boom, we got that stuff set. So now for the last one, this one, like I said, we got a v_interp_to because this is going to be now our socket offset. So we're going to grab the camera boom to then look, we're going to drag off and look for a set socket offset, just like that. And then what we're trying to do is the camera parameter we're trying to target, we're going to throw into the target. The get delta seconds, we're going to throw into the delta time. And then for our transition speed, that's what we're trying to target and interpolate to for our socket offset. So now we can then, whatever our target is, set our target parameter in there, and then get the current parameter of that, whatever we set. So that way it loops through that. And then set that accordingly there. And now we are essentially done with setting up our camera style. So now what we're going to do is we're going to compile and save. And we're going to hop back into the event graph. Because what we're going to do now is we're going to move this back, the event begin play. And I'm going to highlight all this stuff. And I'm going to right click it. And I'm going to collapse to a function. And I'm going to call this function set references, or no, I'm going to set input actions, just like that. And then I'm going to put that under the category of input, just like so. And now let's move our stuff down here. So now what we're going to do is our update camera, we're going to drag off here, and we're going to copy it and paste it into the event begin play. So what we're going to do, move that over, is we're going to connect that, and then we're going to connect our event tick into this update camera. And what we're going to do is we're going to leave this unchecked, but then we're going to check off our update camera under the event tick, because we want the interpolate to be true, because we're trying to go back and forth once again to these different camera settings, you know, depending on what style that we choose, depending on our action. So now if we click play, you could see that already our character camera, boom, is now closer to the character. We have a slight offset of the character, and it's no longer the third person, you know, template camera setting. So if we were to strafe, you can see how we go back to having the somewhat similar settings as our camera settings for the third person template. But again, I'm not strafing, right? But then if I reactivate our strafe button, we go back to the strafe camera, although we do not have the strafe functionality set to strafe, but this is our strafing camera. But now, however, if I right click to aim, you can see our camera goes in closer. But you can see how it nicely, smoothly transitions like in and out of our camera styles due to whatever input that we're pressing, right? So it's like nice and smooth, right? So here's our far, here's my aim, here's my close. So you can see how we're getting the different camera styles based off of our input action and how it interpolates to those different destinations or the target settings that we have set. So we now have our camera settings set up. So now in the next video that I'll be doing, ladies and gentlemen, is I will be then setting up the strafing functionality for our character in the next video. And I'll probably also let me see, because what else do we need? No, I'm not going to do that next video. So, well, what I was thinking of doing. So the next video, yeah, we'll be going over our update rotation. So that way, when we want to strafe or we want to orient to movement, you know, or use controller desired rotation, you know, that we want to determine whether we strafe or we go back to being able to look in the direction that we're trying to go to. In the next video by doing the update rotation function. So hopefully this was hopefully understandable. I know I went pretty quickly. I did mention in the pilot episode and I believe previous episode that I was going to go rather quickly just because I kind of want to get through these parts, because all we're doing is we're resetting up gasp settings before actually getting into your first 60 minutes of motion matching. So that's why it's like, I know that the title is called your first 60 minutes of motion matching. However, I'm trying to get all of the gasp settings set up, or the stuff that I like using for my projects, before we actually get into that. Because then once we actually get into that, you know, of course, the series is not going to be 60 minutes. You know, I wish it was. If you were to actually go to the, you know, the actual the web page that has the readout or the notes or the blog or whatever that go over, you know, what you'd be doing with motion matching, sure, you can do that within 60 minutes if you read and just copy down. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to show y'all how that stuff actually works while also explaining what's going on and showing y'all a simpler way of just doing gasp. However, this is not really a simpler way, but it's probably the best way so far that is actually relatively simple of setting up nice camera settings. Even though we don't need to do this, I want to do this to kind of get people in the groove of being able to do this kind of stuff with their projects going forward, so you can see how intricate you can make your camera settings and stuff like that. So With that being said, everybody, thank you for watching this video. If you did like that, please check out my other videos and my future videos to come, and also check out my Discord if you really do want to. But other than that, y'all have a great rest of your day and take care.